Okay, so without further ado, I think we will kick off our first session, which is the session with Tom, where we'll be talking about the global and emerging trends for HR. Okay, over to you, Tom.
So it's my pleasure to see you all here this morning. So my name is Tom Haak. I'm in the Netherlands, although you can't see it. And I'm the director of the HR Trend Institute. I will show you our little flag. So HR Trend Institute. And at the HR Trend Institute, we are trend watchers in the domain of people and organization. My background is in international HR. I've worked in various multinational companies like Aon in insurance brokers, like Arcade is a big engineering company, KPMG, Philips Electronics. But for the last 6 years, I'm leading the HR Trend Institute. And it's an honor for me to open your conference. Well, I'm super glad so many people have been able to join today. I renamed my presentation. I hope you can see it. And I renamed it to Tom Haak's HR Action Cube. And you see the cube there, that's me in the Corona time. So the Action Cube. And I try to explain it this, you all know Rubik's Cube. And in the HR Action Cube, there are several dimensions. And in fact, it should be a cube with more than 3 dimensions, but that's difficult to explain. One side of the cube, and that's the yellow side, one side of the cube is around what are your burning issues in your organization. And you might want to write them down in the chat box so that well, you can share them with others. What are your burning issues? And that's an important element to stop here, because today's focus is HR tech. And what can we do with HR tech? But in the end, it's not how can we use the tech, but it's about how can we use the tech to serve our clients, to serve the people who deal with our organization in a better way. And how can we use HR tech, clever HR tech, to deal with the most urgent issues in the organization? So that's dimension number 1, and I will come back to that dimension. The second dimension, and I will cover that today as well, is around the trends. What are important HR trends? And how can you use them to deal with the major issues? So trends, in fact, trends are blue, issues are yellow, I have to learn it. And then in green, another dimension is, you could say, the enablers. What are the enablers that can help us to deal with the issues? And of course, HR tech is one of those enablers, and there are others. So I encourage you, if you are behind your desk, if you are have some writing material, to draw a simple matrix. And the matrix has on the top 5 boxes. 5 boxes. And the 5 boxes are for what are in our organization at this moment the most burning business issues. And the other dimension, and today we keep it to a simple a matrix, is 10 boxes. And the 10 boxes are the trend areas I will cover this morning in my introduction. Let me switch on my timer. You can see the timer here so that I stick to the time in a good way. So you have your matrix, and in chapter 1, I'm going to deal with the area of the most burning business issues. And of course, those business issues are different for organizations, but I have looked at organizations, and I have made a prediction of the type of issues that will be high on the list at this moment. And issue number one is productivity. Productivity. And you could call it also differently. You could say productivity, I don't like that word, but it's also the question, how do we stay in business? How do we get back up to speed? And in many countries, and I'm sure also in your country, businesses have been harmed by COVID-19. So productivity is high on the list. People have been working out of home. For some people, that means that productivity has gone up, but for many people and for many teams, it has meant that productivity has gone down. So burning issue, and of course, HR has a lot to contribute in this area. How can we get productivity back up? So in your matrix, write down productivity. The second area is innovation. That's the question. The market has changed. The situation has changed. We can't do certain things. So how can we innovate? How can we deal with new markets? How can we deal with new situations? Most of the time, innovation is on the list. In the current COVID-19 situation, it has become more burning. We have to renew ourselves. If we don't do that, we don't survive. A good example is the conference business, and we are today in the HR conference business. And if we say, well, yeah, we can't organize a live conference, what do? We have to innovate. And today, you could say it's maybe a small step in the innovations, but at least we are together in the end after the 2 days with more than 700 people. And through that innovation, maybe even we are doing things in a better way. So the second area was innovation. The third area, still top row of the matrix, is resilience. Resilience. How can we build resilience? Organizations, and through that the people in the organizations, have been, in a sense, hit by the current crisis. And we don't want that to happen again. And we want organizations, teams, individuals in organizations that can, in a way, deal with bad conditions, but also benefit from it. And we talk about resilience. There's another word I like a lot, that's anti-fragile. It's from a book from Nicolas Taleb. And where resilience, in a way, you could say, is you bounce back. Anti-fragile is a little bit more, well, maybe you can get out of a situation like this in a better way. So not only bounce back, but bounce back on a higher level. How can we increase resilience in our organizations, in the teams, and in the people in our organizations is high on the list of many organizations. And if you look around the internet today, I'm invited for webinars almost every day around the theme, how can we build and increase resilience? And again, that's an area where clearly HR has a lot to contribute. And the fourth area, business issues, organizational issues, is well-being. How can we make sure that the people who are connected to our organizations, in a sense, are safe, are treated with respect, and that they feel that they can do their work in a good way. So well-being is broad. It's more than just feeling well. It's being safe. It's being respected. It's not only concerning, you could say, the employees of our organization, but it's wider. It's the employees, it's the clients, it's the suppliers, it's our candidates. And in a sense, organizations should also care about the well-being in the wider society. Traditional, an area where HR has a lot to offer, and we have seen in the past months that well-being has become higher on the list. And I mentioned 4, I asked you to draw 5 boxes, and number 5 for the moment. Of course, there are more, and in your specific organization, it might be different, but you follow the thread. What are the most burning issues? And I proposed at least 4 at this moment. Now we go to the second dimension, the blue dimension in the cube, the blue dimension. And the blue dimension is, what do I see, what do we see as important trends? And trends that could be used to deal with those burning issues. I took out of my box of trends, I took 10. There are, of course, there are more. Some of them are interrelated, but you will get the idea. Number 1 on my list, and again, this is the blue dimension of the cube. Number 1 on my list, and it has been on my list quite a while, is personalization. Personalization is the question, are you, and I'm talking about the organizational context, are you in your organizations willing and able to take the individual personal preferences, needs, and capabilities into account? So not one size fits all, not we do things for everybody in the same way, but try to find out where the differences are, how you can really understand people on an individual level. And in the HR domain, traditionally, that is not so easy. We can learn in HR, we can learn a lot from marketing here. In the consumer domain, personalization is a lot further advanced. And my local my national supermarket gathers a lot of data of me by my shopping behavior. Based on my data, they are able to offer me on a weekly basis personalized offering. It makes sense to make a distinction between personalization and customization. Personalization basically is you gather data, you use data, and then tailor what you offer to people based on that data, so they don't even have to answer any questions. Customization is more, you ask people what they want. And if you look, for example, in the consumer domain, and if you're ordering jeans or shoes today, you can go online and you can really build your individual personalized jeans or any other clothing. So number 1 on my trend list, personalization. Number 2 is speed. And you would say, well, that what's new, but things go faster. And especially also in the HR domain, traditionally, we are a little bit, unfortunately, on the slow side. So the question is, how can we do things faster and faster? And the good news is that also in the current crisis, we have seen that many things can be done a lot faster suddenly. So if the pressure is high enough, so if the issues are really burning, then we are able to apply and find the right solution. So that's good news, but that's also a plea to stick, look at those burning issues. So speed, how can we do things faster? And there's a lot to say there. Of course, also in the relation to one of the enablers I will deal with later, that's HR tech, because HR tech enables us to do a lot of things more and more faster. One of my favorite examples is around mood measurement. that pictures it well. And we have seen in mood measurement that the traditional mood measurement way was a big questionnaire. Maybe once every 2 years, 100 questions, people filled it in, it was processed. It took months before you got the result. Well, slow, and not a big impact. We have moved, and many organizations are using those today to shorter, more frequent pulse surveys. But with the technology of today, you can even go to real-time mood measurement. There are solutions that, for example, in sessions like this, they look at my facial expressions. They process my sound, and they also look at the content of what I'm saying. And based on that type of input, they could at this moment already give an immediate feedback about what is the mood of Tom. And my mood is generally good, so no need to measure. But real-time mood measurement using clever technology, for text technology, looking at sentiments in text, that is very promising going forward. So 1, personalization. 2, speed. 3 is around fun. And you could say, well, today, when we're talking about crisis, is it good to talk about fun? And it's not only fun. You see there X. You could say that's the employee experience. It's broader than fun, but I put it on this trend. Things can be fun. And also that is in the HR domain sometimes a little bit problematic, because we tend to be serious and we don't use the fun element to be more effective. And there are numerous opportunities also powered by HR tech. We all know clever gamification solutions in all the domains of HR. Recruitment is a good example. But asking yourself the question, by making things more fun, or by offering our people a more positive experience, can we then accelerate developments? And it's an interesting area. I can talk long about it. On our website, you can find numerous examples about how to use, for example, gamification in the HR domain. So personalization, speed, and fun. And then number 4 on my list is be kind. Let's be kind. And I think that is, in a sense, and I wrote about it last year, and I think it has been proven, this is an important trend. It's an important trend. And you could say, that's, again, why should we even say that? Huh? But if you take this as a guiding principle, let's be kind, that will help a lot of things. Also in tough situations. In the coming period, many organizations will have to lay off people, but you can do it in a respectful way. Let's be kind has also to do with the rules and regulations in your organization. Many organizations are very strict in a sense. And if you take the angle, okay, but our starting point is we try to be kind, and we try to look back to personalization at individuals, what they want, what they need, then you might be a lot more effective. So number 4, let's be kind. Number 5, I hope you can see them all clearly. Number 5 has to do with adaptive technologies. Adaptive technologies. And I'm sure in the coming days you will hear a lot about HR tech solutions. What you often see is that the technologies are too standardized. especially if you look at our bigger HR systems. And many of you will have been involved in HR system implementation. The first question they generally ask is, what does your process look like? And then they fly in the consultants, of course, and they are going to map the processes. But those processes tend to be standardized. And that's not necessary. With adaptive technologies, back to personalization, you could say, well, how can we use the technology to adapt to the needs and the capabilities of people? I will try to give a simple example. In performance management, many performance management processes, often automated, follow a standard process. And the reality is, many of those processes don't work very well. They force people in a workflow. Say, okay, December, goal setting, July, mid-year review, December, January, end of year review, and there might be steps in between. And through the workflow, people are forced to do things you want them to do. I've seen many organizations where you open your computer in the morning and there's a message that says, hey, Tom, time for your review with Carla. And I think, oh, not today. I have other things to do. And to be honest, those review meetings with Carla are always a little bit challenging for me. But then the next day I open my computer again and it said, ting, 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 Tom, you have not done your review with Carla. Well, and then maybe I do it, but nobody likes that. If you make your technologies a little bit more adaptive, for example, in this example, you might know based on past data what the behavior of people is. There are managers, leaders that are very obedient and diligent. They always do their reviews in time. They always do that. So they don't need a lot of push and pressure. You only give them one signal, then they do what you ask them to do. Other managers, for example, new managers who have never done it, they might need more guidance. So there is a situation where you might need to give them a little bit more input, but also maybe a little bit more help. So you can use the technology to adapt to the need and wishes of people. That was number 5. I rush up a little bit. Number 6, and it fits nicely in, is learning in the flow of work. Learning in the flow of work. And the essence there is that we try to get as close as possible to the work, the actual work that people are doing. We try to get as close as possible, and then we help them. Example, in this example, I'm a nurse. I'm on my way to assist in an operation. On my iPhone, I get a little test. My schedule knows that I'm going to assist in an operation. I get a little test on that operation. So I fill in a couple of questions, and if I pass the test, good luck. If I don't pass, then I get a small video, 5 minutes or so, maybe even shorter, around the essentials of that operation. So in my flow of work, I'm helped with a micro learning solution at the moment that I really need it. There are other examples, also back to this presentation. There is software today that I don't have it, but that I could have installed on my computer. And that software would analyze what I'm doing at this moment and starts to feed me back some tips, some suggestions, what I could do better. Maybe talk slower or talk faster, or maybe look a little bit more direct into the camera, because that's a difficulty. The camera is there and I'm looking at my screen. So I would get feedback while I'm working, and I could use that feedback to improve my way of working at this moment in real time. So learning in the flow of work, interesting concept. I challenge you to look at that. Number 7 of my list of 10, and I won't go into deep in the world, but that's a tougher approach to diversity. And I don't know about diversity issues in Nigeria, but my guess is that also there, for example, gender diversity is an issue. And in my country, I'm Dutch, that's also an issue. If we look at the boards of the big companies in the Netherlands, well, those boards are predominantly male, white male, older men. That's still the typical picture, and it is not changing. Now we see that people don't find it any longer acceptable. And so you sense, and we certainly sense that a tougher approach to diversity, and there again, technology and analytics can help a lot to do that. Number 8, sorry for the speed, but well, we only have a short time. No, you know the concept of nudging, but the concept of nudging is very helpful to deal with the type of issues I showed you this morning. Nudging, in a sense, is inviting people to show certain behavior without saying it to them explicitly. In these days, there is a tendency sometimes to come back to the rules and regulations. Say, Tom, you should do this and this and this and this and this. Maybe it's unavoidable, but if you can use nudging, you can invite people in a lot friendlier way to show that behavior. An example from Google, from the nice book Google Works, Laszlo Bock, a couple of years old. But in Google, for example, you could say people need to eat less. We know that. Now we can say to people and send them videos and messages, eat less. What they did in the Google canteens, in half of their restaurants, canteens, they decreased the size of the plates. So in half, small plates, half big plates, and then they looked what happened. And surprise, surprise, in the restaurants where they only offered small plates, people ate less. That's a good example of nudging. So people don't even notice it, but they are more or less invited to show that behavior, eating less. Also in these Corona times, I've seen offices already with big signs on the wall and stop and forbidden to do this. There are other offices that are cleverly redesigned in such a way, well, that people more or less naturally keep a distance, that people naturally follow a certain flow. So nudging, important concept, look at that. Number 9, and yeah, I think I still have time. Number 9, inclusive leadership. Inclusive leadership. What we have seen also in these COVID days, that teams, organizations that are more based on self-managed teams, that are less dependent on the hierarchy, are generally doing better. If you wait for instructions from the top, and if you put a lot of burden on the leaders in the organizations, things tend to slow down, and people tend to wait for instructions. There, where leadership is more distributed, where leadership is more shared, and ultimately you could say that's in organizations where they really work with self-managed teams, but there are all kinds of variants in between, that works better. And of course, this is a trend, but clearly this is one of those trends, and that's, I think, one of the key messages also said in the introduction. And many of the trends I mentioned today are accelerated, can be accelerated in the current situation. Inclusive leadership, number 9. And number 10, I promised you 10 in the matrix. Number 10, and I call it corporate employee activism. But it also has to do with purpose. Purpose. It's more and more expected of organizations that they take their responsibility. Also their responsibility in society. That's what employees expect, and that's what society expects. So we cannot just focus on saying, well, we take care of our organization and the people in our organization, and that's it. That's no longer acceptable. Employees expect more. They say, we want to work for companies that really make a difference. And I see a question there. Okay, we'll come back to the questions. I won't get distracted at this moment. So 10 points. And I realize I explained them super, super quick. And there are more trends. But the reasoning is, and the question to you as well, how can we use those 10 trends to deal with the 4 or 5, 6 major issues in our business? You get a big grid, but I assure you that if we would do a brainstorm, we would find many interesting things in boxes in the grid. And well, unfortunately, we are not able to do a brainstorm today. So I talked about the business issues. I talked about what are the trends. And now I will just mention 3 of the enablers. One of the big enablers in the HR domain is people analytics. People analytics. And I also say analytics for the people. I will come back to that. But people analytics, working more data-driven and evidence-based, is one of the foundations of HR and effective HR today. And if we look at this matrix, then we would start looking for, what do we know? What works, what doesn't work well? And if we don't know it, we might set up little experiments to test what works and what does not work. And people analytics. I say analytics for the people because there's a tendency in people analytics to take only the organizational view. We want something, we're going to measure it, and we're going to use it. It's also important to take the people view. What's in it for the people who are connected to the organization, the candidates, the employees, even management? Don't neglect that question, because it works a lot better if you do things where there's a clear benefit for the individual employee. So people analytics, important driver. Second one, and that's the theme of today, technology. And technology is one of the most important drivers for the HR transformation. And in almost all of the boxes I mentioned, there are technology solutions, also in people analytics, of course, that can help us to do things in a clever, intelligent, faster, more effective way. The last, or no, last but one, I have 4. Number C is, you could say that's also a kind of enabler. That's always take a holistic approach. The holistic approach is try to act as an HR architect. Take a step back. Look at the total architecture. Don't start immediately actions in one of the boxes in the matrix, but first try to find out what could work well and where, in what way, and you could say, where can we have the biggest impact with the least effort? That's the ideal situation. I always explain the impact effort matrix, but you want to be on the upper right corner where there is high impact with low effort. Don't do things that cost a lot of effort and only have minimum impact. But the HR architect is able, with her knowledge around HR, with her knowledge of methods, effective methods, well, she can have a lot of impact. Number 4 on the list of enablers, and later today, Natal Denk will give a good presentation about agile working, but this is also an enabler to be more effective in HR and working, applying agile methodologies in combination with design thinking. And I can talk about any of those boxes more extensively, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of time. Recap. I talked about the HR action cube, and I challenge you to use it. Always start with what are our burning issues. Because if you do things which are not dealing with the urgent issue, the question is, why do you do them? And the second area is around what are the trends. And they were blue, so look at the trends and see what you can do with the trends. And use the HR enablers, HR tech, working in a holistic way, using people analytics. And many examples to be given. And if you go again to our website, you will get many examples. And now I give the floor back to the facilitator. I'm sure you have been asking questions. I've not seen them, but I'm sure we have some time left for questions and answer. Back to the chairman.
Thanks so much, Tom. I think that was a wonderful presentation in terms of looking at all of those points. And I particularly like, the angle of starting first from the problem, what the burning issues are, before talking about the solutions or looking at how the trends can help. Because many times you find organizations getting on the trend before really asking the question, what are the key problems that we have? So I've got a few questions here. So there's a question from Olubumi Olauti, and a question is, can there be a solution to gender diversity all over the world?
I was saying back to, you could say, personalization. Don't look necessarily for generic solutions, but the approach to the solution, I think, can be have common elements. I will give you an example. I have seen research of a Swedish organization. This is about gender diversity, and they use clever analytics. So they looked at all the elements in the organization that could play a role in diversity. So not only looking at the ultimate, you could say, lag indicator. Lag indicators are often how many females in senior positions. Well, you can measure that, but when you measure that, you're often far too late. They looked at all kinds of steps in the process, and they found a lot of interesting data. For example, they found out that interviews, if I'm a male recruiter and I interview male candidates or I interview female candidates, there was a difference in the length of those interviews of around 15 minutes. And why is that? Because male, I'm a male recruiter, I feel a little bit more comfortable with another male. We do some small talk, we talk about cars, football, what have you. 15 minutes small talk, but in that 15 minutes small talk, the bias has already hit Because then it's, oh, this is a nice person. He's from the same town where I live, or he has a similar car, or he has similar hobbies. This must be a good candidate. So in those 50 minutes, the bias is already set. So what they did, and they found a lot of these type of differences, and then they were able to take action. For example, say interviews are only 45 minutes. These are the subjects you discuss in your interview, and no small talk, no talk about hobbies or other irrelevant elements. So no, I think what you should do around the world, even it's not only geography, but also the type of organization, but taking a rigorous approach in measurement, formulating hypotheses, testing those, and then being willing to take measures, I think that can be common all around the world. Many diversity efforts I have seen, unfortunately, are window dressing. They say, okay, we have to do something, and then they do something, often not fact-based, but for example, what you see a lot is mentorship program for young females. Well, that helps a little bit, but that's not necessarily the high impact interventions that really make a difference.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Okay, so I'll combine the next two questions. I've got a question here that is asking you to go over the 7th point again. I think that's tough diversity approach. And another one asking you to go through the, I don't know if it's the 10 points or the 10th point. So I'm going to assume it's the 10th point, which is around corporate and employee activism.
Yeah, so I think that number 7, I've just done. So the tougher approach in diversity is no window dressing, rigorous management, and a real willingness to do something. And as I said, in many organizations, if they say we don't have enough females at the top, but are they willing to, the rigorous is, okay, now the next vacancy, we appoint a high qualified female. But often that's not done. They take some measures, they do a mentorship, but if there's a vacancy at the top, they say, well, yeah, but we have quality first and equal. But of course there are nearly always highly qualified female candidates. You can't explain to me why that cannot be the reason. So a rigorous approach is also rigorous measurement, but also being, in a sense, and that's back to then point 10. Point 10 is corporate employee activism. That has also to do with, are you, what, as an organization, what are you doing to help to solve big issues in society? And we know, and we see it these days, that the power of big companies, especially of big companies, is big. I won't mention name, but big companies can have a big impact, but also small companies. And the expectation is, and that's why it's on my trend list, because it's happening, but maybe a little bit too slowly. The expectation of people is, the expectation of society, that organizations take their responsibility. You cannot say, well, yeah, it's the government. No. Yes, of course, the government has a responsibility as well, but you cannot walk away as organizations from your responsibility. And it can be connected to the diversity issue. We can say we need more diversity, but then organizations should really do something about it and not just say, okay, well, yeah. So that's what I mean with activism. And HR, in a sense, can play an important role here. Because HR often can act as the guardian of the values. Are we not just following orders, but make sure that values in the organizations are respected, that values in organizations are really lived? And that's a whole area where HR can contribute a lot.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So I've got one question here. I'm going to try to paraphrase this. This is from Dr. Adaobi Ariguzo. So the question is really around, so with the pandemic, a lot of people now have to work from home. And then looking at, you know, the local context that's in Nigeria, there are certain costs that come to the employee as a result of working from home. So things around the increased cost of internet connection, because they now have to do their work from home. And then the issues of power, electric power. So they've got to power their homes using their own cost. So for the HR practitioner, what are the things to think of in dealing with this, particularly trying also to manage the costs to the company? And I think the question also tries to tie that into the design thinking approach, and then how that has an impact on the policies within the organization.
It's difficult for me to judge the Nigerian situation. So if I say things that are not totally right, I apologize for that. I think here, one element is to talk about cost. The other element is to talk about the benefits. Yes, so that's a starting point. And that's also back to analytics, because, and it's back to productivity. We need for people to be productive. They have to work from home. So how can we facilitate that in the best possible way? It comes with a cost, but it also comes with a benefit. So I think here analytics can help partly. It's also back to personalization, because what I've seen in not in Nigeria, but in for example in the Netherlands, that initially the approach was everybody needs to work from home. That's the measure. Now there is more room for personalization, saying, well, some people don't have a right home to work from. Their internet connection is not good enough. They have the whole family at home. They live in conditions where they cannot work. So those people might be the first people we are offering other facilities they can work. There's also a personality element. Some people have a personality that does not fit very well with individual home working. So with personalization, you can try at least to take a more differentiated approach. Also looking at the most cost-effective situation, because there might be people where power is not an issue. There might be people with the right internet connections. So start with those areas that are most urgent also in the workforce, and try to show and calculate that it helps to increase productivity. I've seen, and I've talked to people in the last weeks, and there are certainly teams and organizations where by working from home, productivity has increased. People work more effectively. They don't have those long, boring meetings anymore. Their commute has gone down from sometimes hours per day to 0. So they feel fitter, they do their work better. So there is a benefit there's a benefit, and that should result also in increased revenues or whatever the deliverance of that organization is.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So I think one of the things I hear from that is in designing the solutions, first be clear around what the problem is. So what's the real issue, and then designing around that.
Okay, yeah, you showed design thinking. I can't give a lesson in design thinking, but basically design thinking is around be close to the customer, whether it's internal or external. Really understand the issues, and then it's back to agile as well. Short iteration. So it's built, for example, a quick solution, a prototype, test that again, test it, see if it works, and then in short iterations, develop the solution. Instead of saying, okay, we're going to develop one solution for the whole organization. We work 3 months on it. And then when it's ready, you find out, well, it does not really tackle the issues. And for many people, it does not work. So design thinking, that's absolutely a critical skill for HR in combination with Agile. And Natal will talk more about that this afternoon.
Okay, so I think later today, to add to that, we're having Natal Dank. She's the director and founder of the Southern Blue Consulting firm and the co-founder of the Agile HR community. She'll be talking about reinventing human resources for the future of work. So I'm sure she will touch a lot more on this. I think we've got about 8 more minutes till the end of this session. So I'll just try and pick a few questions.
Absolutely, please.
Okay. So we've got a question here from Imoyo saying, isn't the analytics enabler contradictory to the personalization trend? Analytics focuses on total data like macroeconomic factors, etc., and usually ends up using averages. Personalization requires understanding the individual, which is time consuming and might be even subjective.
No, so I totally don't agree here. Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. So personalization and analytics, they go hand in hand. And it's finding out, it's using not macro data necessarily, it's using also micro data. What is, I take myself as an example, what is the personality of Tom? What fits well with Tom? What does he like? Let's say, often you hear a lot of assumptions. For example, what I hear a lot is, tell me your date of birth, and then we know what you want and what you need. That's about millennials. If you are a millennial, okay, and we have all seen those lists. We know what millennials want. That's totally not true. Because if you know someone's date of birth, you cannot predict her wishes, capabilities, etc. So get away from those. That is not data-driven. Segments are a little bit more better if you have really data to substantiate it. But even that does not, and you can say Tom Haak, older man living in the Netherlands, okay, then we know what he wants. Also, that is not true. You better try to find data on my individual preferences and needs, on my individual behavior, and then use that data to really tailor the solution. And so it goes hand in hand. And by using the analytics, we are able to be, in a sense, more human. Because the other question often asked is, does analytics not, it's contradictory to being human? No. But it's human and data together. So I'm also not making a plea to say we should give put our decisions in the machine. And I think that's one of the important themes also for these days. How can humans with technology together do their work a lot better, especially in the HR domain? Well, the gaps are super big between what we could do and what we are doing in reality. So analytics helps us to be more personalized, helps us to be more human, and helps us also to be a lot more effective, because we try to find out what works and what does not work, and then we don't have to do other things.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. So I think we'll take a last question because we've got, this session closes in about 5 minutes. For the next session, which is the session on engagement analytics and measuring the return on investment on engagement products, it will be holding in a different Zoom room. I think the link is in the chat box, and you can also get the link from the website for those who want to join. So the last question we'll take is somebody's asking high impact versus low effort. Could you explain more in more detail or share some examples of things that fall into this quadrant?
Yeah. The matrix, and I can draw it super quickly. Impact, high, low, effort, low, high. So here you have it. So I'm looking at it, but this is impact high, yeah, and this is effort low. So here you want to be, yeah, high impact, low effort. So what you can do is, if you have certain, you want to, let's say, build resilience. I talk about that. Build resilience. Then you can say, well, for example, we could try to hire more resilient people. Yes. Is that difficult? Is that a high effort? And what is the impact? Well, I would say in your recruitment efforts. If you test people on resilience, that's relatively easy to do. Does not come with a high cost, and the effects might be high. So that's in that box. Another one might say, well, we have to train all our people in becoming more resilient. Let's train people. Generally, to be honest, most training efforts are always in the low impact area. It's very difficult to get training effort, especially if they are very leadership training, management training. It's very difficult to get them in the high impact box. So you can spend a lot of money on training. And the question, so that I would say training all the people to become more resilient is low impact, but maybe high cost, because that's a lot of effort. So map. Of course, I'm doing it very quickly now, but it pays off to say, well, let's focus, let's try to find things that are here. Another example, that's the last one I will give, but I've worked in companies that say, we want to increase our international picture. We want to internationalize. Let's move people around the world. Well, that's super costly. Expatriates, etc. We know that's super costly, and maybe not. It's a lot more effective to hire international people locally. So, well, let's see whether we can find international people here locally and hire them. That's higher impact and lower effort.
Okay.
A lot more, yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much, Tom.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
and I hope it was worthwhile. Any feedback is welcome. Send it to me. Also, people in the audience. It's always difficult in these type of sessions to see. I don't see you. I don't see any reactions. So feedback is very helpful.
So I'll share one feedback with you. So we've got feedback from Dr. Dalby Ariguzo, and she's saying, thank you for sharing basic highlights. Very insightful session. The discourse around the enablers is also very enriching. Thank you for the session.
Okay, great.